and welcome in to another episode of Irrational Confidence. My name is Micah. I am joined, as always, by my fellow host and friend, Lino. We are down a man this week. Kaylin is unavailable due to flu-like symptoms. I usually have a
On the
better
spot with
reason.
that one.
But Kaylin will be back next week. But because Kaylin is absent, of course, Lino and I are doing a Homer's Podyssey episode. We're going to do a Heat takeover. And what better way to celebrate the Miami Heat than to talk about the downfall of the Philadelphia 76ers?
Yes, sir.
So we will start with some Sixers talk, then followed by some Heat talk. But like every episode of Irrational Confidence, we are going to start off with some news and notes. The first news is pretty exciting. There are changes coming to the All-Star game. So this is coming per Shams Charania of ESPN. Essentially, what they're doing is changing the All-Star game format to now be a tournament. It'll feature 3 teams of 8 All-Stars, and the 4th team will be made up of the winners of the Rising Stars Challenge. So that creates some fun intrigue. Those 2 teams will play in what's basically a semifinal. I believe Shams' tweet said they'll be playing to 40, and then there will be like a championship game. I think it's fun. I think introducing fresh stuff to the All-Star game is good. I think a lot of people were kind of upset with how it played out last year. I don't know if it'll make the players play any harder, but it'll probably still be fun to watch. Lino, what do you think of these changes they're making to the game?
Just excited to see changes in general. I think everybody across the board can agree that we've been very disappointed with how the All-Star game has turned out over the past few years. And most people are just hoping every 4 or 5 years we get one really good competitive game. But it even feels like it's been even longer than that since then. And so this is going to be a very refreshing take on the All-Star game. I'm glad to see them do something different. And even if it doesn't pan out, it's good just to see that they're not being stagnant with this format and with how the All-Star game has happened historically, because it's about time we just let that go and accept that in that style of play, All-Stars are just not going to compete very hard. So excited to see how that turns out.
Yeah, that's well said. And I think Steve Jones Jr. on the dunker spot always makes a good point that because of the rise in 3-point proficiency and efficiency, the All-Star game is just going to be hard to be competitive because guys are pretty much just going to concede pull up threes. And I feel like the last, half a decade of All-Star games have kind of been that until the last couple of minutes. It's just an insane amount of threes being taken by the very best shooters to ever live. So, you get games in the 200s and whatnot. So I'm excited. Like you said, they're trying things. I'm always going to be cool with that because the product recently has not been awesome. So it'll be fun to check out. And I think the Rising Stars is a nice addition. The All-Star weekend is for young fans. It's for kids to get excited about their favorite young players. And, if Zach Edey Victor would probably be an all-star, but Amin Thompson, there could be fun guys in there that kids will be excited to watch play against, LeBron and Steph and our old guard, as it were. So that's the fun portion of the news. The rest of the news, as always, it feels like is quite depressing. I guess that goes for basketball and the real world. But for the basketball news, we have several injuries. Probably the most noteworthy is Luka Doncic has suffered a wrist injury. This came out today. We're recording on the 21st. So we don't have a ton of details. It sounds like he's going to miss a couple of games and be reevaluated. At In Street Clothes on Twitter, which is Jeff Stott's account. He does great stuff. He has like a medical database for sports injuries, and he was saying it's usually about 6 days with a wrist injury like this for NBA players. So hopefully Luka won't be out too long. Next up, we did have a long-term injury. DeAnthony Melton, who we mentioned last week, suffered a sprained ACL and now is undergoing season-ending surgery. So definitely not the outcome we were hoping for, but very unfortunate. We talked about the Warriors in depth last episode, and DeAnthony Melton had been a huge part of their success. Honestly, a perfect backcourt mate for Steph with his ability to play such good defense and hit shots. So big loss for the Warriors, honestly. Depth is their strength, so every injury really hurts them. Some slightly positive news. Chris Middleton has been medically cleared. Shams' tweet was a little I'll say strangely worded on this, but what I took from it is he's medically cleared, but he's not like in game condition shape yet. So I'm assuming this is just like the ramp up period. He'll start playing 5-on-5 and hopefully be back to the court soon. The Bucks have been playing slightly better lately, but Middleton would definitely be a welcome sight for that team. And now the last two tidbits of news are Philadelphia 76ers news, which segues nicely into our first section, which is a little Sixers talk. If you're listening to this podcast, you're an NBA fan, and so you probably know things are not going well in Philadelphia, which is something you could say at almost any point over the last 10 years. This specific version of it is a lot of injuries. So, you know, coming into the season, we had Joel Embiid missing time with his knee injury. Right as he comes back, Maxey suffers a hamstring strain. Paul George missed a few games because he suffered a knee hyperextension in the preseason. He comes back. This all culminates last night, the 20th. They play Memphis. Their big three is finally on the court together, all healthy. And Paul George suffers another hyperextension to his same left knee. And so now he's going to be out at least 2 games and then be reevaluated. The Sixers are currently 2-12. They blew a 19-point lead to the Miami Heat, and that prompted them to have a team meeting, which then leaked into the media, which upset a lot of people. Paul George had a podcast about the team meeting. It's just always something in Philly. Lino, whether it's the team meeting, what you've seen on the court, what are your thoughts on Philly's season and just how things are going over there?
You know, honestly, because this is probably going to get pretty negative, I figured I'd start off with just a little bit of sympathy. Not so much sympathy because Paul George gets paid a ton of money and got paid an insane amount of money to be in Philly, but you hate to see guys injured at the end of the day. Like, especially having a recurring injury like that, which almost feels kind of like a freak accident on the court most of the time. It's just unfortunate. You don't want to see those setbacks. I love when my most hated teams are doing badly, but I usually prefer it to be just from poor performance. And we'll get into the poor performances, but ultimately, I feel for Paul George. I know it's frustrating for the organization, and health is one of those things that no team really has a ton of control over. And so I can just, we've been there before with our team when things are not going well from a health standpoint for our roster. It is just very difficult to scrap together wins. But overall, this team has way more problems with that. And I'm of the belief that even if all three of their big three were able to play together extended minutes, these problems would still be there. They probably wouldn't be one of the worst teams in the league, but they'd still be having problems putting together wins. The team meeting thing, 12 games into the season is insane. And then having that team meeting for like an hour after a Miami Heat blow up and then just still losing afterwards.
That's the
It's like,
thing.
that's brutal.
I feel like teams, I would love if we could somehow have a database that would tell us like records after players only meetings. Cause I feel like
Mhm.
teams always win. And then Memphis just comes out and hits 23s without Jaw. And it's just like, yep,
Mhm.
maybe next time. Like I think Philly has Brooklyn next. So maybe
Oh,
they'll get a chance there.
I
But
don't know, man. Brooklyn plays hard basketball. And that's the thing, though, is that usually when teams come out of a team meeting or players only meeting, they have a lot of fire, they have a lot of energy. And more than anything, they have a lot of effort because they don't want to be in that awkward position again. And that's, you'll look at the stats. We'll talk about the stats. We'll talk about the bad 3-point shooting, the terrible rebounding. But at the end of the day, when you watch that Memphis game, all you see is a lack of effort. These guys are not trying to play basketball. And it's so interesting that that's the case because they have two balls of sunshine there in Tyrese Maxey and even Jared McCain, their rookie. And it's like, how can the vibes be that bad that throughout the whole game, it's mostly guys just sitting there watching other dudes play basketball? Nobody's really cutting. Nobody's really moving. The ball's not moving. The boards aren't being cleaned up. It's just overall, it's not a way that you're going to be able to win basketball games. And they've got to figure out how to instill some culture into this locker room again, some identity. And it doesn't have to be culture necessarily, but just some kind of physical identity that says, this is the type of team we're going to be. Because right now, they don't have any. Their offense doesn't have like a style to it. we see the highlights of Jared McCain moving off ball, looking Steph Curry like out there. And I was expecting to see that when I watched that Memphis Grizzlies game. I was like, nobody's doing that. Like, this is not actually happening outside of that one play. And ultimately on defense, they don't have an identity there. There doesn't seem to be anybody that's really, really trying on defense. But from the top down, it doesn't look like they have assignments to eliminate certain things from other teams. Like, they just go out there, kind of defend one on one, maybe switch to a zone when things are getting bad. But ultimately, beyond all the numbers, the effort is the big issue here. And that is going to not be fixed if they can't figure it out soon. But what are
Yeah.
you seeing out there? Kind of what do you feel like is the main issue for the Sixers right now, and what's been the experience and reaction from when you're watching the games?
Yeah, like, well, what you were saying when I was watching that Memphis game, I was like, man, Caleb Martin is playing really hard, and it really stands out because it doesn't
Hmm.
feel like anyone else is.
Yeah.
And I think it just speaks to a disconnect from the top to the bottom of the roster, including the coaching staff. I think tactically, Nick Nurse is up there. He's probably like top 10, top 5 coach with all the different things he does. But managing personalities probably is not his strong suit. We've talked about on the show before. He calls players out
Hmm.
in the media. He can have kind of a harsh slash prickly personality. And so I think this type of locker room that's going through all of these issues right now it's just not an ideal fit for him. And it's not totally on him. The players need to work on it too. But I would feel better if there was maybe a more personality manager type coach at the helm. So I think that's an issue. And then, of course, it also starts with Joel Embiid. I'm not somebody that gets into a ton of like narrative based stuff. I don't know Joel Embiid. I don't know his personality, but we do have official reporting that he was called out by Tyrese Maxey for being late to meetings. And apparently that's something that has, bothered the team. And that's just kind of tough. That's the facts of it. You're the leader of the team, you're the highest paid player, you're the MVP, you set a standard even if you're hurt, even if you're sick. It's they're not asking you to play injured, they're just asking you to show up to meetings on time and kind of set the standard for everybody, be the adult in the room. And honestly, I think it's awesome that Maxi called him out. I think that speaks to him feeling like some ownership of the team. Like you mentioned, Lino, Maxi seems like a ray of sunshine. I'm sure like if Nick Nurse had it his way, the whole locker room would probably follow Maxi's demeanor more than Embiid's. But I think it's a problem. They're so talented. I think they can definitely still do. It's strange in the East. They still really haven't eliminated any of their potential, other than maybe being a top 4 seed, because they
Hmm.
can't miss the playoffs in the East. Like it would almost be impossible for them not to make the play in. And honestly, with how bad everyone's doing, other than the top 3 or 4 teams, they probably still have time to get like out of the play-in, which is incredible. But they'll need to be healthy. As far as schematically, it's strange. I don't totally understand the Paul George usage. I
Hmm.
think it like in theory he's a perfect fit. Like he's just like this third option. You can kind of play him on lesser offensive players so he can be off ball, create havoc, and obviously he can switch on to better perimeter players to guard. Then he has the shooting, but it's just weird. It's like when he's out there with Embiid and Maxey or Embiid and McCain, it feels like he does almost nothing. And then they'll put him in these lineups with it when it's like him and mostly bench players, and it's like he's doing too much and he's turning the ball over a lot. So it almost reminds me a little bit of the Mikal Bridges fit with the Knicks, where it's like, oh, I expected this to be seamless, and it's actually a little more clunky than I would have thought. I don't think it's
Hmm.
anything that they won't be able to figure out. I think it'll, coalesce eventually. But I have been a little surprised at the PG usage, and now he's out again, so it's going to be hard to get more
Yeah,
more
and that's
cohesion.
And that's the difficult part about it is that I think to this point he's maybe only played 8 games so far of their 14, or yeah, I think they've played 14 games so far this season. And so it can be tough to figure out what your role is going to be when this roster is consistently in and out. But his minutes out there, I do think, are being affected by his own personal poor 3-point shooting. I think he's down to like 27% from three, and he's a career 38%, which, isn't out of this world, but it's like consistent. It's slightly above average, I'd say. Um, And so to be down 10% from three is going to be tough while still having the same usage he's had in LA and in previous destinations. So I do believe that, the Paul George that can be an effective player out there is still in there. But I think Paul George, of all people, need a consistent environment to succeed. And the Philadelphia 76ers are the opposite of that year in and year out, every year round. Every year round, they typically figure it out. But ultimately, this team continues to kind of break down more and more. And it just becomes a harder hill for them to climb at the beginning of every season. Do I believe this team can climb out of it? Sure. And, there's this idea that they can't, you know, miss the playoffs with how the Eastern Conference is set up. And I don't know about that. I think there's teams that are worse than them that are winning a lot more games than them at this point in time, and if they don't figure it out soon, and it doesn't look like they're on the verge of figuring out, I feel less bad about like the Milwaukee Bucks right now because they look like they're on the verge of figuring it out. But the Sixers do not look close to knowing what the heck they're going to do.
Yeah, that's a great distinction. They feel far away from putting it together. This Paul George injury is going to put them further away from that. I mean, they need to be on the court together to figure out their chemistry. And the start of their season could not have been worse. You
Mhm.
think they've been without at least one of their big three in every game. Essentially, they had them to start the Memphis game and then lost Paul George, I believe, to start the second half of that one. So they really haven't had any time to put anything together. And it sounds a little pessimistic, but Embiid will miss more time. Like there will be
Yeah.
more injuries. So it's like you're already 10 games under 500. Even if you were guaranteed Embiid played the rest of the way, it would be hard to get out of the play-in. But you almost are guaranteed he won't play the rest of the way, especially not back-to-backs. He and Paul George, probably both of them won't play them, even when healthy. So yeah, it's worrisome. And I just it could be one of those things where like maybe they all are healthy going into the playoffs, but then I think you're kind of in that situation like we've talked about with other teams like this, where it's like I want to say it was like the Brooklyn teams, like their big three, the Phoenix team last year, where it's like the big three just really didn't get to play together. They didn't get to feel each other out, and now a top five defense is attacking them, and they don't know what to
Mhm.
turn to. So it would be hard to be optimistic about almost anything in Philly other than Jared McCain, who has been
And Tyrese
balling.
Maxey. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's just
when Maxi's off to such a cold start, but I mean, you trust he'll get there.
yeah, the
But
shooting's really bad there, but
yeah,
you still you know what you're getting with Tyrese Maxey, like
yeah,
talent wise, like it's still there. He's having
for
a bit of a
sure.
slump, but yeah, Jared McCain, what a guy! That guy's incredible. He was one of the again, like Caleb Martin, like one of the few guys that looked out there that was moving around, was really
Hmm.
trying. I didn't see him making too much of an impact on the defensive end from my eyes, but the effort was there, and like that is a guy that you want in your organization no
Hmm.
matter which organization you are. Like this guy can fit in anywhere with his skill set. And so it's especially a shame that it's probably going to take them a year or two to capitalize on the talent they have right now.
Yeah, I was mad at myself during this like past week when McCain's really broken out because I do my like Heat draft board every draft season. I'm like, okay, who do I want the Heat to take the most? And before I really dove into it, I had McCain pretty high because I was like, they need shooting, could be a good
Hmm.
backup guard. And the more I looked into it, I was like, man, I just don't. The draft people I trust don't seem that high on him. There are questions about his athleticism. He's so small. Even if he's a good scorer, he probably can't be your number one. And so, there were like Jarrett Jack comps. Trying to remember who else, like DJ Augustine, just, like good
Hmm.
backup point guards, which he still might end up being that. But gosh, the scoring looks really good. He looks really poised, very comfortable in the pick and roll. The game looks like it's moving really slow for him. And I think the offense has been super encouraging. The defense has been about as bad as you would think. I mean, he's small, he's not overly athletic. There's just not that much he can do. But he's trying to be in the right places. I could see him becoming one of these guys that like is top 10 in charges drawn just because he's trying to make some kind of defensive impact. And that's he's a smart player. He might be able to
Hmm.
impact the game that way. But McCain's been awesome. It's cool to see him balling. And I think for me, really the last thing I wanted to kind of hit on with Philly is what do you think they should do? Very open ended, but is there like a roster move or a type of player you think they should go after? They have tradable salaries, they have a couple extra first round picks from the Harden trade. Is there some archetype or even a specific player you think helps in any way?
Yeah, I mean, I think the good thing is you could probably do anything and at least get a little bit better. Like they're one of the worst teams in almost every category that matters. So you could attack any of these categories and see some considerable improvements. Like right now, they are 29th in 3 point percentage. They are 30th in defensive rebounding, 28th in total rebounding. And even worse, they're 30th in assists. Like they don't pass the ball a lot. So, you can attack that from so many different angles. You can go get some bigs that are better at crashing the board than Andre Drummond and trying harder than Joel Embiid right now, at least just to have somebody there that can do that, or just get some wings that are really good at rebounding, get yourself a lot of second shot opportunities. Maybe the 3 point percentage starts to come back up when people can get a few more free shots out of that. And you're also reducing the amount of second attempts that you're giving to the defense or to your opponent rather. You could go out and try to find some 3 point specialists. It's interesting though because I feel like they have talented role players. Like I like Kelly Oubre, I love Caleb Martin. Jared McCain is an awesome. You get a lot out of that rookie. I like that they went and got Yabusele. Like I want to see those guys succeed, but they're going to need to get better statistically in these areas in order to see improvement. So I don't think there's going to be one thing that's going to fix all of this, but the good thing is there's so many problems. You can probably at least fix a couple of them. But what are you kind of thinking about how they should approach the rest of the season, given how things are set up?
Yeah, it's interesting to think about. Bobby Marks put out a good little infographic on Twitter, kind of highlighting the different options they have. And like most of the league, pretty much everyone they signed in the summer is not eligible to be traded until December 15th, which that's
Mhm.
still a couple weeks. So it's like for Philly, it kind of feels like something needs to happen now. But most of the league is in that situation where they won't be able to trade then. But the real worrisome part to me is they signed KJ Martin to a deal that is essentially a walking trade exception. I think it's like 1 year, 8 million, and then the second year is either a team option or non-guaranteed. It's basically more than KJ Martin would have gotten paid, but he agreed to kind of get this knowing that he'll likely be traded. But for whatever
Mhm.
reason, the mechanisms used to sign that deal means he won't be able to be traded until January 15th, I believe.
Oh
So
wow.
that could be a problem because at that point, you could still make a trade, it could still be helpful, but like we're 2-12 right now. What is it going to look
You
like?
might be 4-24 at that point.
Yeah, so
Be
it's
bad.
it that's a little worrisome that that's so far away. But honestly, Philly, I don't think, like you were saying, I don't think the talent deficit is really the problem. I think it's a chemistry slash health thing. So I think honestly, the best acquisition they could make is just a healthy big three. I think
Yeah.
everyone on the roster will look a lot better once they're in their rightful slot. Caleb Martin
Mhm.
just being, his kind of versatile role player self, Kelly Oubre coming in and just launching off the bench. Those guys, when they're not as overtasked, will probably look a lot better. But a true power forward would be good. Those guys aren't
Yeah.
super easy to find. But like somebody like Jeremy Grant would be a
That's
cool fit
exactly what I
here.
was thinking.
Yeah, which I feel like everybody like wants Jeremy Grant because it's just like Portland. Come on,
Come
free
on, give it
him.
up.
So, but yeah, somebody like that is somebody I could see helping Philly. Just with some, he's not
Yeah.
like a great rebounder, but defense, positional
Mhm.
size, pretty
Well,
good offensive player. So.
let me ask you this. Is Nick Nurse on the hot seat in the middle of this season if things are bad in January?
So yeah, I don't want to be salacious, but yeah, I was thinking about it today. I was like, okay, they can't move Maxi, they can't move Embiid, they can't move Paul George. It's like you don't really have a lot of options other than to fire the coach. Like
Bring
they'll
somebody
probably
in who at least can make the vibes better?
right, and I mean they probably won't like because they might go 4-4 in their next eight or
Mhm.
something, and maybe that's enough to kind of right this ship. But yeah, if it gets like a lot worse, like if they go 3-6 or whatever it might be, if it like eventually you see this in the NFL too, it's like if you have so many highly paid guys, you can't really blame them. Your only option really is to fire the coach. And I
Hmm.
think Nick Nurse is a good coach, but I also know Daryl Morey is a very cold, calculated general manager. And if he thinks it's not working, I think he would cut bait. But like we always talk about, what's the pivot there? Is it Terry Stotts? Is it Frank Vogel? Like, it's tough to pick up a coach mid-season. It would almost have to be an interim coach unless they do the whole Doc Rivers, they kind of line it up before they ever fire Nick Nurse sort of thing. But that was
Yeah.
odd. That doesn't happen very often.
Yeah. I mean, I think, yeah, I guess I just don't know which coaches are out there, but and I don't think Nick Nurse is a bad coach. I do think he's not a good players coach. And if the vibes are off, he's not going to be able to be his best coaching self. Like, I
Yeah.
think he could be still an incredible coach somewhere else that didn't have as much emotional drama. And
Right.
like going to the Sixers is probably one of the most emotional places you can go. It's the
Yeah.
craziest fans. The roster's been a mess forever. Like, that's just a lot to deal with outside of the X's and O's. Nick Nurse is
Yeah.
a great X's and O's guy. And I don't know who they should go get, but I mean, I think they're probably people on his team that like assistant coaches out there who probably have a better ear with the team at this point, and you could probably go get one of them. But yeah, it's tough, man. I hope they start winning games, but I'm lying when I say that.
Yeah, I don't know how it's gonna course correct exactly. I really thought it would in Memphis. I thought they'd
Mhm.
pick up that win and kind of get it rolling. Embiid had 35 and 11. It wasn't like he had another terrible game, but they uh they weren't able to get it done. So we'll see what happens there. I will say, just as like, being like TMZ sports ish about it, it has been funny after that leak happened about like their players meeting and Maxi calling out Embiid. uh
Mhm.
Embiid has been like very vocal about how angry he is that that got leaked. And Paul George also made a similar comment on his podcast saying like that never should have been leaked. And there have been a lot of good memes on Twitter and Blue Sky saying that Nick Nurse is the leak. And that would be the most Philly thing ever if somehow it came out that the head coach leaked the players' meeting calling out the star player. That feels right in line with like the Colangelo burner account that we
Oh
had
my
from a few
gosh.
years ago. So,
Incredible.
stay tuned, fans. We might see something crazy. If you're a Philly fan listening to this, I'm so sorry. Maybe pivot to the Knicks or something. I don't know. It's nightmarish right now, but we'll see. We won't pile on Philly too much longer. That's probably enough on them. McCain looks awesome. Maxey will be good. You have an MVP
That's
on
a
your
good thing. Like
team.
it's a great thing if you've been a Sixers fan for like the past 4 years and you're like, all right, this has sucked, but we've got some really young guys and we're good for like the next 10 years. We have two guys we can build around in our guard core. If Embiid doesn't work out, we could probably pivot to like a young athletic wing and try to build something with a traditional core. But if you've been a Philly fan for more than like 10 years, I just feel bad because you've been a part of this process till it's reached like late stage capitalism levels of depressing. And so
Yeah.
I am empathetic towards that endeavor. It's gotten past the part of where it was fun to root against this team. Not too far past. I'm still having a good time. But I do hope they turn it around. And I am excited for the young talent that they have.
Yeah, I was thinking today as I was thinking about this as I walked to get lunch, which says a lot about me. But I was I was walking to get my lunch, and I was like, "Man, if the Sixers had drafted anyone but Maxi at that slot, I don't even know if Embiid would be a Sixer right now." Like if they didn't have that like bridge to bridge the gap between like the Harden era into this era, like if there was no running mate for Embiid, it could be disastrous. So,
Yeah,
you know.
for a team that really missed a lot of first round picks or like first picks or like lottery picks, they know how to hit on those late lottery, 14 through 17 picks
Mhm.
because they got their guy. And
Yeah.
yeah, it probably kept Embiid here for another 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, and it looks like they just got, a clone of them in McCain. So they just keep stacking wins. So good for them. Bad for all the teams that pass on those guys. Miami. Speaking on the team that passed on Tyrese Maxey, we're going to talk a little bit about our beloved Miami Heat. We just piled on the Sixers for 20 straight minutes. The Heat are 6-7, so it's not like we're juggernauts necessarily.
World
But
beaters.
yeah, but there have been some good moments in the season. There have also been some down moments. Lino and I text after every Heat game. There have been some all capitals "We are back." There have been some 500-word paragraphs about why we're doomed and we need to blow it up. So we're gonna get into all that today. Lino, I want to say, we really haven't talked about the Heat that much on the pod. So to start, what's just kind of your general impressions of the team? Some things you're excited about, maybe some concerns, just so far.
Yeah, I think the thing that's easiest to be excited about is the revelation of Tyler Hero and the season that he's having, being the player that we were all really, really hoping he could be at one point in time, and maybe a couple of years past when we were expecting it. But, you can never really control somebody's timeline in that way. And so that was very exciting. I think that the resurgence of guys who've been able to play very stably, like Haywood Highsmith, Duncan Robinson, those guys kind of being able to level out a little bit after having a few up and down years. I've been very pleasantly surprised by that throughout this somewhat rocky start to the season. But the pain point of this all is that it's unfortunate because we are a painfully middling team in almost every regard. And it sucks to be average. And the other word that people use for that is typically mediocre. And it's kind of been a difficult thing to face because I do think there's certain things we do really well, and there's players that are playing very well, but they're kind of being counteracted by some underperformance, some general bad luck, and some lack of late game execution has put us smack dab in the middle of a season where we could be running away with the third or fourth seed if we could put it all together. So those have been my general thoughts. I haven't been too down except for like right after losses. Usually I can pick myself up by taking a look at Pelle Larson minutes or something like that. But yeah, it just sucks because of the context in which it's happening in. Like, we went into this season expecting to be like an eighth or ninth seed, but we didn't expect the rest of the conference to be terrible. And so it almost hurts worse than if, oh, the rest of the teams are actually just way better than us. So that's just what it is. It's actually worse than that. So that's where I'm at right now. Lots to be excited about, but lots to work on at the same time. And they just kind of cancel each other out. But where are you at right now with the Heat? How have you been feeling in general? And is there anything in particular you're excited about?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you said is it definitely captures how I felt early on, which is I've seen a lot of Heat fans and Heat media people talking about like, oh, like what are you worried about the slow start? Like they're the fifth seed or they're the sixth seed, which is cool. But to me, like you were highlighting, Milwaukee's gonna get better, Philly's gonna get better, the Knicks are getting better. They seem like they're turning a corner, and obviously you have Cleveland and Boston that are running away. So to me, I'm like, this is we'll look back at this stretch and be like, dang, if we could have gone like, 10-3 in this stretch or 8-5, whatever it may be, we're looking a lot better than the 6-7 where we're really in the middle of the pack with everyone else. You look at a team like Orlando that lost Paolo and it's like, oh, well, their season's over. They reel off 6 straight wins. They lost to the Clippers last night, the Lakers tonight, but they're really, able to still gain some ground even with a star player out, which Miami really just wasn't able to do with Jimmy out. They had the Minnesota win was good. They were able to get one of the wins against Indiana, but overall they have not been able to make up as much ground as I would like. And honestly, I think it's because they're a team that's still figuring out who they are, which is disappointing to fans because this is almost identically the roster they had last year. So you were hoping we would kind of have that. I'm going to just use we a lot in this segment. That kind of Cleveland continuity that seems to have propelled them to this incredible start. Obviously, no one expected Miami to start 10-0, 15-0, but you did think they'd have an advantage over these teams like the Sixers and the Knicks that acquired all this new talent. You know who these guys are, but as we talked about in the preseason, we didn't even know who the starting lineup is. And as we'll talk about later in the show, we still don't know who the starting lineup is. It's a difficult position. So I think this team has a lot of depth. I think they have had really good performances by a couple different players in key spots, which has been awesome. But yeah, everything good about this team has to start with Tyler Hero. And it has just been, I mean, I've watched pretty much every dribble of Tyler's career since the moment he was drafted, including preseason summer league. Like, that was an important pick for the, future of this franchise. And he really has been a home run for the 13th pick, just in what he did alone, just being a six man of the year, home run for the 13th pick. But this leap this year, and we'll see what sustains. It's still a small sample size, but 66% true shooting. That's 10 percentage points higher than his career high in true shooting. That's 10 percentage points above league average. He's shooting 45% from three. The rim finishing still isn't great, but he's getting to the free throw line more. He looks a lot more comfortable in the pick and roll. He looks a lot more active on defense. I mean, this to me is the best version of Tyler Hero I could have ever imagined, like realistically. I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
he really looks to be an elite on ball scorer who can function really well off ball and just elevate an offense. So, super thrilled with how he's looked. I hope he keeps it going because him getting an all-star nod would be incredible. It's one of the things I'm hoping for the most in this season. But he's definitely the biggest bright spot, but there have been some not so bright spots that we'll get into as well. But one of the first things I kind of wanted to pivot to about this Heat discussion is something that's really being discussed a lot amongst Heat fans right now, which is who should be playing.
Mhm.
Spo has played a ton of guys. There's been games where he's played 10, 12 players sometimes, and they do have a lot of depth. But at the end of the day, when healthy, you want to know who's going to be playing when the chips are down. So, Lino, to do this exercise, I think the best place to start is the starting lineup. So, if you were Spo going forward the rest of the season, assuming health, who would be your starting five?
Yeah, I think the starting five I would be most confident in obviously starts with our locks: Tyler Hero, Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo, and then at that three spot, honestly, I'm probably going with Terry Rozier. Despite his performances, I just have so much more confidence in the way that that lineup plays when he's out there, because I do think he does a great job of being a good point guard and managing things in a way that only a guy who's played that position for so long can do. His shot has been bad. Some of the decision making sometimes isn't great, but honestly, most of the time when I'm watching him play, I feel like he makes a lot of smart decisions when it comes to other players. I think his approach to how he impacts the game gets a little overthought when he's out there. He sometimes does a little bit too much when he's trying to create for himself, and it doesn't usually end up working out. But when he's creating for others, when he's moving the ball around, I think it looks really good. And I think Tyler plays better next to him than he does really others, and I think he does well with Bam as well. And so that's the guy that I have there. And then the fifth starter for me would probably have to be Haywood Highsmith. I think that guy rounds out that lineup in a way that elevates the defense and requires very little usage. Highsmith doesn't really need the ball at all. And the first four guys I named are all guys that could use the ball and do something well with it. Terry probably being at the bottom of that list, Tyler being at the top, Jimmy and Bam kind of being there in the middle, and then Highsmith there as a connector. He's definitely the connector that I think we wanted Jovic to be, but I think Jovic is just a little bit too much of a loose cannon still in this at this point of his career, and I don't think he's really figured out how to mesh well with those four specifically, and just overall performs better with the bench units in my eyes. But what do you think about that lineup, and does it match up with yours, or did you have somebody else there?
Yeah, for me, my four locks are Jimmy, Bam, Tyler, and strangely enough, Haywood Highsmith. I think,
Oh,
like you were
nice.
saying, his defense, the way he just plays his role perfectly with those other three, I think is so important. I think you don't want Jimmy necessarily having to guard every elite player on the other team. At least you have Haywood out there to maybe if it's a quicker guard, you can put Haywood on him, or if they only really have one elite creator, put Haywood on him and let Jimmy play off ball. So I really think Haywood has become incredibly valuable to this team. So yeah, for me, it really comes to the two guard spot if we're considering Tyler the one in this
Mhm.
situation. And to me, it's Duncan Robinson or Terry Rozier. And I think
Mhm.
it's on the surface, you can evaluate those two players and how they mesh with those other four, but you also have to consider how they will mesh with a bench unit, the
Mhm.
players they'll be playing with off the bench, and how that will impact the rest of the rotation. So I've honestly struggled with it a lot. I think right now I would say I was glad you said Terry because I feel like people are going too far the other way with Rozier.
Mhm.
It's Spo said he recently just revealed to the medical staff 2 games ago that he's been dealing with a foot issue and he got a game off and now he's had 5 days off and is expected to play against Dallas. But he's, hasn't looked right. It makes me feel better that it might be injury related. Um, but he's good. He's a good player. He's a little redundant with Tyler. And honestly, what's interesting is we're having the same conversations we've had for 4 or 5 years, except it's been Tyler versus Duncan. We've always been
Mhm.
like, oh, who should start? Oh, Tyler's a better six man. Duncan's a better fit with the starters. Now Tyler has elevated to such a level that it's just turned into Terry versus Duncan. And I don't know, Lino, I want to ask you about this because to me, I feel like Terry being on the court helps Tyler probably the most of the other four, and maybe
That's exactly what I
Haywood.
was thinking.
And I think Duncan being on the court helps Jimmy and Bam the most.
That's a good point.
And to me, though, like, I love Tyler and I love how he's played, but I do still acknowledge this team's ceiling is predicated on Jimmy and Bam. So
Mhm.
I don't want to say I lean towards Duncan, but I do really strongly consider Duncan because of how well he plays with Jimmy and Bam, and also because if you don't start Duncan, Kevin Love's going to play all the backup center minutes. Duncan and Bam probably won't have much time on the court together if Duncan doesn't start. So what do you think of that kind of give and take?
Yeah, I think that is such a good point, and I never really thought of it that way, but I think you're 100% right. That decision making does really affect who has, a guy in there that really helps set them up. I do think Terry being out there does allow Tyler to really focus on being a scorer while Terry can kind of set the table for everybody else and kind of manage things in that way. And Duncan does such a great job with the two-man role with or two-man game with Bam, and Jimmy loves finding Duncan in the corner when on his drives. That's a guy he depends on a lot or believes in a lot rather. And I think the key is that one way or the other, the first substitute has to be one of them. Like whoever starts for the first 6 minutes of the game, and then the first sub would probably have to be Terry or Duncan, and then that way they kind of get run with that lineup, and that's when you start to sub out other guys slowly. We got to stay away from all bench minutes because that's the main problem. Is Terry cannot play with the full bench. It does not look good. I
They
don't like
tried
it.
they tried it in that Orlando game in the opener. And I mean, every lineup got destroyed in that game, but that Terry plus the bench lineup got destroyed.
Yeah, and I feel like I've seen it a couple times since then, and I'm just like, ugh, this is not gonna work. Like Terry, it's too much on Terry's plate, and he's not setting up for guys who can be efficient enough with it. Um, and
I have
so I
the
would rather see him. Or
I
go
was
ahead.
gonna say I have the stat right here. So Terry on, Jimmy, Bam, and Tyler off is a -10 net rating, 133 defensive rating, which means
Oh my god.
whoever they played in those 19 minutes was playing as if they were the greatest NBA offense of
Oh
all
my
time.
gosh. That is insane. That is
Yeah.
so crazy.
So small sample size, but it does match the eye test that you need somebody out there with Terry, which is good because that was the next point I wanted to get to with you. So let's assume Duncan is a starter. How would you craft the second unit group? Let's say it's four bench players, one of which will be Terry in this situation.
Mhm.
Who's the starter you would throw in there, and then who are the three bench pieces you would kind of mix in?
Yeah, so Terry's gonna be there. He would probably come in, and I do like Terry and Tyler playing together.
Hmm.
Um, I guess the third sub would probably be Bam. If Duncan, Tyler, and Bam got to play as starters together, that's one of our most effective trios. So if they've had that time, I'd probably take Bam out, bring in Kevin Love,
Hmm.
and let Terry, Pele, Kevin play with probably Jaime Jaquez. And honestly, Heat fans are going to hate me for this, but I'm probably putting Jay Rich in there. I
Yeah,
really like Jay Rich. That
some
lineup is
defense.
kind of small, kind of fast. Maybe not as fast as I want it to be. But those are probably the guys that I have him playing with in the bench lineup. Um, but I think first it would probably be a few minutes where it's just Terry and the starters minus Duncan,
Yeah,
and then maybe
yeah.
subbing in Kevin Love with that.
They honestly have so many options off the bench. You can
It's
really
true. I was
kind
like
of.
looking at the names I have written down. I was like, oh, my head's spinning. There's so many wings
Yeah.
everywhere.
And yeah, I was trying to think like who is the best like Terry group? And obviously we don't want to be the Charlotte Hornets necessarily, but I was
Mhm.
thinking what could be like a good run and gun kind of group Terry could play with. Kevin Love is obviously great for that with the outlet passing, and he'll have to
Yeah,
play. I mean, he's gonna be Bam's backup. So I think Terry and Kevin are a
yeah.
good pairing in that way. I like Jovic with that group, who loves to
That's what
push
I
it
was
in
missing.
transition, and he's been playing really well off the bench. The
Mhm.
starting experiment wasn't great, but really good off the bench. So I like those three. He's hurt right now, but Jaquez, I mean, I think, there's an argument Jaime's the fifth best player on the team. So you got to get him in there, got to get him run. And then that last spot, I agree with you. I think it'll be Josh Richardson. I think,
Yeah.
there's not a lot of defenders in that group, and Spo loves Jay Rich. Alec Burks would be fun for just like a gunner. Pella
Mhm.
would be fun to get him some experience, but I think it will be Jay Rich to kind of be that point of attack defender and handle whatever 6-man score the other team has. So that to me that's a good 9-man rotation. Terry, all his comments ever since he's gotten to Miami and prior to my knowledge have been very team first, team friendly. He doesn't seem like somebody to me that would have a huge issue with like going to the bench, and I think he'd probably end up closing a lot of games if he was on it.
Yeah, I agree. I think overall it will be. I guess that's the question I have for you. I honestly don't care too much about how like the starters go and who comes off the bench, as a unit. I think who shares time on the floor the most is going to be important. But also, who do you think we need to be closing with night to night, or when we're in the playoffs? Like, who do you imagine closing games for us and sealing wins?
Yeah, to me, it's tough. I lean more towards Terry to close.
Hmm.
Terry throughout his career has been a really good clutch scorer. That's just something he
Hmm.
seems to have a knack for. Even last season, Heat fans will remember down the stretch, he had some big shots. I
Oh
want to say it
man,
was the Knicks game. He had multiple threes down the stretch in the fourth. So I like Terry out there, especially in the playoffs, because I love Duncan. He makes Bam's life so much easier, makes Bam so much more comfortable. But in the playoffs, when it comes down to it, they're gonna flatten you out. They're gonna switch probably 1 through 5. We're not a hard team to switch against, and it's gonna
hmm,
be time to get your own bucket. And I think I'd rather have Terry out there because all the other guys are such threats, other than Haywood probably, that they'll have to respect them. So Duncan's spacing and movement doesn't matter as much if it's the last 5 minutes of a clutch game. So I think I'd start Duncan, probably close with Terry plus
yeah.
Hero, Bam,
Hmm.
Jimmy, and Haywood.
But yeah, I mean, it's nice to have all these options. Like
Hmm.
these options aren't all amazing, and the wins aren't there to really show that it is that way. But when I watch the Kings have to play like five guys, and that's like it, I am
Hmm.
thankful that when things aren't working, Spo has other options he can go to, and he's a
Hmm.
coach that's willing to go to those options. We've seen some crazy lineups. I mean, when we were down against Philly, he was just like, you know what, Alec Burks, get in there, buddy. It's time for you to earn your place on this bench. And he did. They came in
He
and
balled.
he was amazing
Yeah. And
and
Drew
brought us back.
Smith.
Drew
Drew
Smith out of
Smith.
nowhere coming down the line like Stone Cold Steve Austin.
I have been so negative about Drew Smith. This is my official apology. I'm starting to see the vision.
I
I'm I'm
Hey, he's
see
developed. He
I'm
looks different.
seeing the shot looks a lot better.
Mhm.
And I'm seeing, I hate to even invoke his name, I'm seeing the Gabe Vincent qualities. I'm
Oh, yeah.
seeing the rugged point of attack defender. The defense is legit. He just that
Mhm.
shot just has to fall at a decent rate. He doesn't have to be the
Yeah.
scorer Gabe was. Gabe was like in college, like a legit first option. But if Drew can just knock down threes, I think he could potentially take that Jay Rich spot in the second
Mhm.
unit. He could be the guy hounding the other team's best creator while Terry kind of creates for us on offense. So I was really encouraged by the Drew Smith minutes for sure. And yeah, I mean, Spo's got a tough job. Like you were saying, I was thinking about this today. We basically have like 6 C pluses off the bench or like
Yeah.
B minuses. And it's like, they're all great, but how do you make them work in a way that'll really sing? Because there's not an
Mhm.
obvious hierarchy. A lot of these guys, I think, are very similar in terms of overall talent and how they fit together.
Yeah. I think, it's interesting because Pele and Jaime just have such similar effects when they go out there. It's like there's really not a reason for us to have two players that are like this, but it is really fun to have them as options. Like when one of them doesn't have it, when you put them in there, you just switch out the other one. But that brings us to a guy that we did not even consider for a moment putting in either the starting lineup or the bench lineup, and that is our wonderful rookie, Khalil Ware. You know, we both knew he wasn't going to be ready. We both talked about how Spo knew he wasn't going to be ready and had no intentions of playing him. And so I'm not going to knock him for something that we all knew was going to be a development. But based on our needs right now, it is sad to not be pleasantly surprised. But what have you thought about the Ware minutes so far? And, what's got you leaving him out of the rotation right now?
Yeah, I think I liked what Spo did early on, starting Kevin Love for those few games because that allowed Ware to play some backup five. And I thought
Mhm.
you saw what you wanted to see. You saw the flashes, you saw some cool rim protection, saw a great lob threat, and the jump shot looked pretty good. He hit some threes. So I think, and I don't want to like talk down to other members of this fan base, but I do think people get a little too over their skis about young players for whatever reason.
Mhm.
I think it's kind of the mystery box syndrome. Because I think Khalil looks good. I think Khalil shouldn't be in the rotation, but I
Yeah.
think he looks like a good developmental big that's showing some flashes. I hope he gets some time in Sioux Falls to develop. But yeah, I mean, he doesn't really understand pick and roll coverages. He doesn't understand when to, go for the shot block, when to protect the rim and rebound. He's not great at setting screens yet. The offense, he doesn't look very strong when he goes up with the ball. If he's not dunking
Mhm.
it, he can, have some wild looking finishes because it seems like maybe he doesn't have the upper body or core strength to finish how he needs to. All totally be expected. People are talking about like, oh, look at Jared McCain and Dalton Connect. They're going so crazy right now. We passed on them for Khalil Ware. It's like, we just went over how much depth we've had. Like, it would be so hard to get McCain and Connect minutes right now in general. We're struggling to play Pella Larson, who looks awesome. And additionally, those guys were ready-made prospects. McCain was a one and done from Duke, looked really polished offensively, was going to struggle defensively, which he has. Connect was an older player. I think he's 23. He's a
Mhm.
shooter. He's shooting well. He's playing well. So I don't want to like I was saying, I don't want to talk down to the fan base, but to me, Khalil Ware looks right on track. He
Yeah.
looks like he's doing just fine. I haven't seen anything that worries me. You could say like, oh, the Heat, shouldn't have drafted a backup center in the first round or in almost in the lottery. But it's like that's fine if he's a serviceable backup center for several years, like that's fine. The Precious Achua pick was fine, other than the fact that it was not Maxi. Precious
Yeah.
Achua has turned out to be a solid backup center, and I think that's what they drafted him to be. So I don't know. I don't know if it's because Tyler was so good so quickly, or what it is, but I just feel like there is a disconnect. I just don't get the demand.
I think where it also comes from is that, it's a combination of Tyler developing as quickly as he did, and that was one of our first like real hits on a draft pick in a while. So it's very recent in people's brains as the gold standard for drafting and what they can expect from a rookie. And then we get players like Jaime Jaquez, and to his credit, Pelle Larson, struggles to get in there, but he gets in there a lot compared to Ware. And he was like the second round, like late draft pick that we picked him up. So I think people see those guys getting minutes and they don't see Ware getting the minutes they expect him to. I think if he got out there and he wasn't playing well, he'd still probably have a lot of support. Like people would be just happy to see him out there. And I think to the fan base's credits, knowing kind of what we need from our center rotation and what we're not getting, I can understand the frustration of not even being able to see what it's like. I think for people like you and I, not like we have some great basketball IQ or mind or eye for this thing. I think we just kind of know or like just are used to how Spo treats rookie bigs. And because that role is so complex, that he doesn't really give them as much of a leash as you might give a Jaime Jaquez Jr. who can be protected by a guy like Bam out there, or a guy like Tyler Hero who can be hidden on the defensive end and allowed to do what he needs to do on offense to figure it out. Ware has not gotten that same leash, and so I don't hold it against him. I agree with you. I think all the flashes are there for what we'll need in a few years from a backup big, or maybe even deeper into the season, and the minutes will start to grow over time. But yeah, there's definitely just some unrealistic expectations from the fan base right now. And so, buckle in. It's going to be a long ride. It's going to be like that every time we draft big in the first round. So that's just the name of the game right now.
Yeah, and you hit on the perfect point. And I think we talked about this on an episode, maybe during the preseason. Kalen was asking us if we thought Ware would get minutes. And it's the same reason that big men win pretty much every defensive player of the year. It's because the big is involved in every single defensive possession. Exactly like you were saying, you can hide Tyler Hero on, I don't want to slander somebody, but a not very effective offensive player, and he might not do anything the whole possession. But if you're a big, you're going to be in the pick and roll, you're going to be getting screened, then you have to box out the player you're guarding to get a rebound. It's just you're involved in every possession. The bar to be a serviceable big man is so much higher in all the things you have to be able to do because you're asked to do something every single possession on both ends. And this is a team that's trying to win right now. This is not there's no developmental time. There's no like Pella earn those minutes. Jaime last year earn those minutes. Like you either get out there and you swim or you drown. And Kalel has shown some good signs. And I think, the coaching staff knows that, but they also know, if Kevin Love gets hurt, expect to see some Thomas Bryant. Like it's just going to be the way it is right now. Thomas Bryant will screen, roll, he'll rebound, and, he'll get fried in drop coverage, but he'll at least be where he's supposed to be. And, I don't know. I don't get too as caught up in it as I used to, but I do almost like, I feel for fans that are like, Khalil Ware, like he should be starting. And it's like, man, like that
No,
won't work. I
we're going to
promise.
be really bad.
I promise that won't work. It's like, oh, we're a bad rebounding team. This will be the worst transition defense if we started him. Like there's all these give and takes. Like I get it, but it's tough.
Yeah.
But I was the same way, I think, with Justice and Josh Richardson, like when they were rookies. I was like, these two should be playing so much more. What are we doing? But they were both good defenders. So like halfway through the year, they were playing a lot. But Jay Rich played in a bunch in Sioux Falls that year. So it could be a case where Kalel's ready, after January or something. It doesn't mean he won't play all year, but he's not ready right now. Also, Kevin Love's a great backup center. Like that, like he's very good.
Still got it. It's
Yeah.
kind of bizarre. Like,
And
he's probably not gonna be able to play the extended minutes for very long, but as far as just giving Bam a breather, that's our guy
he
right there.
opens the offense for the backup units, makes it easier for everybody to score because he can stretch the floor. He's got the outlet passing, the rebounding. And I've noticed this year, his hands, when he's blitzing the pick and roll, because it's the only coverage he can play against pick and roll, but still, when he blitzes, he's getting a lot of steals. Like he's not just blitzing showing at the level just to be like, wait a second, let my guy get back over here. He's like, I'm coming to get the ball. Like you're not taking care of it, I'm taking it from you. So
that game against the Pacers where he had that 15-point stretch, that was part of it. He just
Ooh.
blew up a pick and roll
and took it
and just
himself. Just
yeah,
like
took it
pump
himself
fake,
all the
laid
way
it
down.
in. It
It's
was
crazy.
hideous, but it worked. It was awesome. So
Yeah, we are
that
fourth
will
in steals right now.
yeah, that's what they've decided to do. They've decided that forcing turnovers is going to be, the way they're going to win. And right now, last I checked on Clean the Glass, 14th in offense, 13th in defense. That's pretty good. 14th in net rating, given that they've had some tough losses. That's not bad. They're not turning the ball over much. They're getting to the free throw line. They're shooting it well from three, bad from everywhere else. We've talked, we've texted a lot about the two
Yeah.
point shooting. They're the
Oh
second
man.
worst 2 point shooting team in the league after New Orleans. So hopefully that'll improve. But yeah, defense is good. Location effective field goal percentage is a stat Cleaning the Glass has. It essentially says, if your opponent shot average from this distance, how well would they shoot? So basically, you want to force a lot of mid range shots. And Miami's 11th in that. So almost top 10 in that. And most of that is coming from they are allowing the seventh fewest shots at the rim. And as we've talked about in the past, that's all Bam. He's able to snuff out all these pick and rolls. He's turned into an excellent drop defender. They are giving up a lot of threes, but that's kind of always been Spo's system. So to close. I did want to talk about Bam a little bit. It's been
I
a
was hoping we'd skip it, but it's fine.
well,
Let's talk
we
about it.
can, but yeah, it's been a strange season. Had such an awesome summer, almost more from like a PR standpoint than anything. It just felt like everybody kind of found out how awesome Bam was. He had the awesome run in the Olympics, had a bunch of cool moments playing with all those superstars. And he's honestly just had a really shaky start offensively to the season. The thing I love about Bam is like in that Philly game, that was one of the best defensive performances I've ever seen. I mean, he
Hmm.
was everywhere. It was
Oh yeah.
incredible what he was doing on defense. And I think he finished with 5 points. And to me, that's kind of been his season so far is the offense has kind of just looked a mess, but his screening has helped the offense be better for other guys. His passing has done that. His defense is rebounding. All that's been there as it always is, but the offense has taken a big step back. So, what have you made of his season so far?
I think it is unfortunate that he's gotten off to this slow start. I do think he's starting to piece it together and that the stats will start to normalize again. I mean, he's technically still averaging 16 points a game, and for his career, he averaged 15. So I think everybody was expecting the leap, and what we got was a dip in efficiency. And so that is not ideal. And there did seem to be some figuring it out that needed to happen in regards to getting used to Tyler's new usage, bringing Terry in a full time starter capacity. Those are things that he had to get used to. Getting confidence in that 3 point shot. Those are all things that can make it difficult to really get off to a good start, especially when you're such a fulcrum of the defense. But at the same time, most of that is just talk. When you look at all of our best performances and our best lineups, he's still a part of every good thing that we do for this team. And what he does off the ball is still some of the most impactful stuff when it comes to winning. Would it be great if he was averaging 20 points a game? Yes. Would it be great if his his mid range shot was falling and his 3 point shots were a little bit better? Absolutely. We'd be winning a lot more games. But at the same time, he's probably the only reason we've won the games that we have outside of Tyler. So everything else about his game is awesome. I think the fan base is spoiled by watching his trajectory go up and up and up year over year over year since he was a rookie. And that's just not how trajectory works for anybody's life in general, let alone basketball players. I mean, we've seen the down years for Tyler before and they were tough to stomach. And so if this is what a Bam down year looks like, I still think he's still an amazing player, very impactful player, and I do believe the offense he'll be able to figure it out as the season goes on.
Yeah, that's well said. Yeah, for me, Bam, I think the 3 point shot is a big part of it. I think
Mhm.
he looks a little, I don't want to say lost. He looks indecisive. I think he's still figuring out when that is the right shot, especially in screening actions. I think up until this season probably, I think for 90% of his basketball life he had screened and rolled. I think there were very few times where he popped, and I think he's trying to figure that out. There was a turnover it might have been in the Philly game. He and Duncan ran a dribble handoff, and Duncan tried to get it to him on the roll, and it was a turnover. Actually, it might have been Terry, because Bam popped, and it was
Mhm.
like, so the guards also don't know what you're doing, and to me,
Yeah.
that's problematic. And I'd have to really dive into pick and pop bigs, and especially bigs that can do both. Somebody like Miles Turner that does a fair amount of both, and really see what determines when they roll and versus when they pop. I think in theory it would be, I'm setting this screen. There's an extra body in the paint. I see the person from the weak side coming to tag. Instead of rolling into three people, I'm going to pop. But that's a quick processing decision as you're making sure you set a really good screen to free up your
Mhm.
guard. So I think it's all stuff Bam's going to learn. My question is going to be, how much will he stick with it, or is he just going to throw it out and just be like, I'm just going to play how I did last year? The 3-point shot will have to come later. I think that's the tough part of it. Per 75 possessions, Bam's career high in 3-point attempts before the season was zero point 0.6 per 75 possessions. This year it's up to 2.6. So that's a big difference for him. He's shooting 31% right now. Honestly, not that bad. I thought it would be worse. If he can be like low 30s, I think that's a good first year from three. That's kind
Yeah.
of how Bosch and different bigs have started. First you got to get the volume, then the efficiency hopefully will follow. So yeah, I think he's gonna have to figure all that out, and I think it's good he's experimenting with it, because as much as I love Bam, and he had turned himself into a 20-point per game scorer per 75 for the last 1, 2, 3, 4 seasons, so that's awesome. But he doesn't take super high value shots. You and I have talked a
Mhm.
lot about, like, man, this is a lot of long twos, and
Yeah.
the upper paint twos, the floater range twos, those are cool, but when it's like, you're rolling into 16 feet, 14 feet, and it's like, man, that's just, even if you drill that at a really high rate, it's still just not that efficient. You're not gonna ever get to the free throw line with those. So if
Yeah.
if this season is rough and it gets us to next season where those long twos are now pretty efficient threes, it'll be well worth it. And I
Absolutely.
thought your point was great, that the beautiful thing about Bam is, if he scored 0 points a game, he would be an incredibly valuable player, because
Yeah.
he's so good at so many other things: the screening, the defense, the passing. So Bam, like you were saying, we've almost gotten greedy, because it's like, oh, this is the best defensive player in the world, and he also is a 20-point per game scorer on good efficiency. Well, this year, give him a little grace. He's still doing everything for the team. They're a mess
Mhm.
without him. And just, trust that he'll figure out the offense eventually.
Absolutely.
Any closing thoughts on the Heat or anything else?
Um, we didn't talk about Jimmy very much. He missed a ton of games.
Yeah, looked
So
awesome against Philly.
looked great coming back. This man is a freaking free throw machine. It's
Yep.
for any other team, I'd probably hate him, but he plays for my team, so I love it.
Right.
Keep on doing what you do, Jimmy.
Yeah.
But yeah, feeling good about the rest of the season. We still, we can't count us out ever, even if we were
Yep.
having a worse season than this. And this season really hasn't been too bad.
No, it's honestly, yeah, it's been up and down, but overall, it's been pretty good. And yeah, I think with Jimmy, I've talked about this a lot recently, but his, like, I was talking to my wife actually about this. I was like, when you think of, like, okay, things are going wrong, the other team's on an 8-0 run, I'm just like, please get Jimmy the ball. What do you picture Jimmy doing in that instance on offense to settle down the offense? And it's get to the free throw line. That's what he
Mhm.
does. But Jimmy's not James Harden. He's not Trey Young. He doesn't have like tricks to do that. He just physically overwhelms his defender. And
Yeah.
as he gets older, there's just going to be less and less times he's able to do that. And I think you see this with a lot of older players, like LeBron. Obviously, is the greatest example of this. But he'll have a 40-point triple double, and then a night later he'll have 12 points, and you'll be like, "What happened?" But it's just like their bodies just aren't right some nights. And also,
Yeah.
the older they get, the less matchup advantages they have. You watch Jimmy in 2020; that's a different athlete than the guy that's
Mhm.
out there now. So I think the time off with the ankle might have been good for him. I think they'll have to be smart about when they rest him, and I think it's why he's so good in the playoffs because there's no back-to-backs. He's
Yeah.
able to get enough rest to be on his game. So, but yeah, that Philly game, I mean, everyone else was tired from the road trip, but it was a good reminder, like, man, all these other guys are great. There is one all-NBA player on this team, and their ceiling will go as he goes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you guys for listening. We hope you enjoyed this Heat takeover. It was a lot of fun for us, for sure. You basically saw our text chat come to life. So this was pretty much everything we say to each other in all caps after every Heat game. And yeah, check us out on all our different socials. We're on TikTok. We're on Twitter. Still need to get the Blue Sky account made, but hopefully you'll get over there soon. We're on Instagram. YouTube is where these are posted as well on most podcast feeds. If you have any questions, please email us at confidenceirrational@gmail.com. And thank you guys for tuning in. For myself, Micah, my fellow host and friend Lino, we will catch you guys next time.